What happened the first time the Celestials came to Earth, and how has their relationship with the planet shifted in the eons since? The Celestials, the nigh omnipotent scientists who direct the flow of life in the universe, have had a hand in creating just about every living organism in the Marvel universe. They drift from world to world, guiding the evolutionary processes of different planets in order to produce different species. The results of these experiments are incredibly diverse, and the Celestials are always curious to see what they can achieve through new methods, and so they perform visits, otherwise known as hosts. So today, let's go back to the very first celestial host and talk about how life as we know it on Earth began at the hands of the Celestials. A host simply refers to the time when Celestials return to a world in order to measure the progress of their experiments, and so far, the Earth has had 4 hosts. The first known interaction between a Celestial and the Earth happened around 4 billion years ago, but this encounter was purely accidental. Billions of years before life had began to evolve as we know it, a celestial known as the progenitor crash-landed here, injured and nearing death. At the time, the Earth had very little genetic diversity, and eventually, the progenitor died at the North Pole. Over the eons, his body was buried deep beneath the crust of the world, and his essence seeped into the earliest plant life. This gave the Earth a very unique composition, which we will explore in just a moment. The first host took place around 1 million years ago, and at this point, humans as we know them did not exist yet. At the time, the most advanced species was a group known as the Wanderers, who were right on the edge of apes and humans, just one evolutionary step behind modern people that we know. The Celestials got to Earth and believed that this species was the most promising of any that Earth had to offer, and so they took a total of 300 test subjects to experiment on. First, the Celestial Gammanon the Gatherer had an idea. He wanted to stretch the limits of what these creatures were capable of, seeing how far he could mutate a Wanderer before it died. Gammanon twisted its genetics in every conceivable way to test its durability, and the resulting abominations were known as the first earthly deviants. The deviants banded together once they returned to Earth and formed the subterranean kingdom known as Lemuria. These experiments made the deviants subhuman, inferior to the rest of the Celestials' crop, but they also made the deviants much more diverse than humans. So there is a greater physical and physiological difference between 2 deviants than there are between 2 humans. After they got a handle on exactly how far the Wanderers could be pushed without breaking, it was Nazar, the calculator's turn to conduct his experiments. He took 100 of the Wanderers, imbuing them with cosmic power, and his intention was to create something superior to the rest of the planet. He wanted to know what this species would do if a small minority of them was given more power than the rest. Would they help each other, conquer each other? Would these beings be worshipped or feared? How would they respond to this behavior? Would they respond with violence or compassion? All of these questions were swirling as Nazar created the first superhumans, the Eternals, and he was curious to see what would happen next. The Eternals were given 3 simple objectives: to protect the Celestials, protect the machine, and correct excess deviation. The first meant that they were shepherds of the deviants, but at first, they had very little interest in human activities. They secluded themselves and worked behind the scenes, even to the point of warring with one another rather than humans or on behalf of humanity. One group of Eternals, led by Kronos, worked to overthrow the reigning Eternal King known as Uranus, and in the process, they exiled several survivors to the planet of Uranus. Humanity, however, can trace their own roots back to the Celestials and the first host, and specifically a Celestial by the name of Oneg the Prober. Oneg saw his brothers in their experiments on the Eternals and the Deviants, but he got a different idea. Gammanon and Nazar took their 100 subjects and mutated them into exactly what they wanted them to be. Nazar wanted a race of protectors, so he forged them in his image, but Oneg took a more hands-off approach. When altering the genome of the third group of Wanderers, he intentionally left a blank space in their DNA, a completely open gap to be filled at a later date and time. Not only did he leave an open space in their human genome, but he made sure that this could be satisfied differently every single time. This is why the death of the progenitor was relevant, because all the energy he imbued within the Earth upon his death remained all the way until humans evolved to their fullest form. This is why humans are able to manifest super abilities, because there is a specific portion of their DNA that has been designed for this specific purpose. Anytime a hero gains power in the Marvel Universe, it's because some sort of energy is filling that space. And so without Oneg, superheroes and villains alike would not exist. But for more lore on the Celestial known as Oneg, be sure to check out our video on that. The Eternals, however, were losing their grip on the Deviants at this time. After the Celestials left, the Eternals spent so much time warring with one another and constructing their own kingdom that the Deviants had now run rampant. They had bred to uncontrollable levels and were running amok across the earth to the point where not even the Eternals could corral them. So, in a final act of desperation, they were forced to call the Celestials for help. When the Celestials arrived, they began what is known as the second host, and delivered their judgment, which decreed that Earth must be cleansed and reset. The second host would have resulted in the complete genocide of everything on Earth. The Eternals, however, made a case for a few select humans, and the Celestials allowed them to construct a life raft for a small group of survivors. Icarus and his team led the survivors to a mountaintop as the Celestials flooded the planet, cleansing it of nearly all life, including almost all of the Deviants. After the Celestials left, the Eternals became much more involved in the life of humans, giving them advances in science, medicine, and architecture. They aided in the construction of Olympia, where the Olympian gods would convene, and they kept the Deviants in line so that humanity would be allowed to flourish. Because of the Eternals, humans learned how to write, plant grains of food, bend and shape metal into tools and weapons, and so much more. This was the beginning of a civilized human society as we know it, including the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians. This is also when various gods began to arise in power, including the Olympians and the Norse gods, who reigned from the realm of Asgard, and the Celestials took notice of this when they came down for their third host. The Celestials wanted to see what humans would do on their own, and in their mind, the interference of gods in mortal affairs was tainting the experiment. They already had the Eternals to guide them in the right direction. They did not also want gods mingling with human activities. So when the Celestials returned to the third host, they confronted various godly pantheons across the world, warning them to cease communications with humans, or they would be forcibly separated. Ahead of this, however, Odin caught word of the Celestials' return, and he convened a council with himself, Zeus of Olympia, and Vishnu, a triad which would later come to be known as the Council of Godheads. Together they prepared a united front against the Celestials when they returned to Earth, and were able to negotiate a ceasefire between the factions, sparing the Earth from utter annihilation. Even if the Council of Godheads could fight off the Celestials, the ensuing war would have ripped Earth to shreds, so victory meant nothing. Odin, however, began preparations for the fourth host, which was slated to take place around 1,000 years later. Each pantheon understood what was to come, and they all made sure to prepare different solutions. For Odin, this was a declaration of impending war, which he intended to meet with full force, so he commissioned a suit of custom battle armor to be used when the Celestials returned. This is where we get the Asgardian Destroyer, the sentient hulking mass of Uru-plated battle armor who answers only to the whims of Odin. He prepared the machine for the fourth host, and when the Celestials arrived, he fought them head on. Unfortunately for Odin, however, the combined forces of the Eternals and the Asgardians were not enough, and the Celestials were prepared to reset Earth. Odin had been defeated, most of the Asgardians had been killed, and Earth was on the chopping block. Luckily for Odin, however, he was not the only god making preparations for this day, and after the third host, a team of gods led by Gaia began scouring the Earth for the very best of humanity, the strongest warriors who embodied the ideals of what it meant to be human, and they collected a pantheon known as the Young Gods. They awakened their supernatural potential and placed them in suspended animation as a peace offering to the Celestials. These young gods were pulled from every era in history, and were awakened when the Celestials arrived to give humanity the strongest possible case for Earth's survival. Gaia presented the young gods to the Celestials, and convinced them that Earth should be spared. Pleased with this gift, Arishem took the young gods with him, and decided that if Earth could produce such a fine crop of individuals, then they should be allowed to survive. Right now, little is known about the fifth host and when this could take place, but the Earth has only ever barely survived. In every host, they had a champion who fought the Celestials not through brute force, but through diplomacy and negotiation. We know that not even Odin can stand up to the Celestials, so if judgment is ever passed and Earth is slated to be reset, there is nothing that anyone can physically do to stop the Celestials. The Earth's best and only chance to survive the fifth host is to make a case to them, show them why we should be allowed to continue evolving, for if the Earth stagnates, it will be reset. But anyway, friends, what do you think of the story of the Celestials hosts? And when do you think the fifth host will arrive? Thank you so much for visiting our channel today. Smash that subscribe button for more, and have a great one.